Hi everybody, I'm Dale. Thanks for joining in. In our time together, we're going to talk about money. Now, not everyone will admit this, but money is a very important part of our lives because where we spend it defines what's important to us. The principles of money we're about to discuss, if you follow them, will change your life forever. This is up to you and no one else. And I'm going to give you a principle that doesn't matter what your education is, what family you come from, it will work. But again, it's up to you. What kind of life do you want? Now, you should have the presentation link sent to you that you can print out what we're going to be looking at. But before we start the presentation, I want to test your knowledge about money. So let's take a money test. Answer these things, true or false. Here we go. If you look rich, you probably are rich. I mean, if you look rich, you have to be rich, right? That's actually not true. Studies show that the richer you try and look, the poorer you are. Just because you have expensive cars doesn't mean that you're rich. There's a book, The Millionaire Next Door, that talks about the average millionaires live a very modest lifestyle. They don't drive around in their retirement plans. There's a great quote that says, "Rich people act poor and poor people act rich." Second, if you want to play on the team, go to the gym. If you want to own the team, go to the library. True or false? That's true. Whatever you study, whatever you work on, that's what you're going to be better at. If you want to play on the team, work on your muscles. But if you want to own that team, if you want to create wealth, what are you reading? What are you studying? Because that's where you're going to have success in. Next, financial success isn't buying more stuff, it's learning to live on less than you make. That's a great financial quote, and that's true. Because the secret to financial success is spending less than you make for a long time. So, next, if I could make a lot, I would give a lot. If I could make a lot, I would give a lot. If I could make more money, I would give more money. Hopefully that's true for you, but that's false. In studying Americans and financial habits, the more Americans make, the less we actually give. Now, hopefully that's not going to be the case for you. That as you make more money, you're going to give more money. And here's why. Next, money makes a good person better and a bad person worse. True or false? That's true. First of all, who said that? Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. Money makes a good person better and a bad person worse. It's the great magnifier of what's already inside us. If you are a giver and a giving person and you make more money, you are going to use more of that money to give to others. If you are a taker in life and you make more money, you are unfortunately going to use that to take more money and from others. Next, most Americans are rich. True or false? Most Americans are rich. Now, I got you on this one because it's actually a trick question. It's both yes and no. So most Americans are rich. From an international perspective, Americans are extremely wealthy. I saw a study the other day from the Gallup organization said the average per capita household income is $8 per day. Americans are very wealthy. Think about garages. Our cars have their own rooms. Many of us scrape food into a disposal. Americans are very wealthy from a worldwide perspective. We have 5% of the population and generate 30% of the world's garbage. Our garage sales, most international people in the world can't imagine the things that we just give away in garage sales. Now, that's from an international perspective. So what do Americans look like from a national perspective? We're actually poor. And let's look at what's the average American family look like, or is not as wealthy as international. So the average American family looks like financially. 30% of Americans, about 1 out of every 3 households, have less than $1,000 saved. The average family would have difficulty coming up with a $400 emergency bill I saw the other day. The average household debt in the United States, not counting home debt, is around $38,000 in debt. Now, what could that debt be? Things like what? Credit cards, right? Credit card debt. What else? What other kind of debt could you have? Car debt, car loans, In your perspective, you may be in college debt, education debt. So in fact, let me say this about debt. Try and stay as far away from debt as you can, because debt robs your future, okay? The average household income of American families is $64,000. The average net worth of American families is about $97,000. Net worth means taking what you own like cars and homes, what they're worth, and subtracting what you owe on them. And hopefully what you own, subtracting what you owe, is positive, and that's growing. That net worth is growing and getting bigger every year. 7 out of 10 people say that financial worry is their biggest stress, which is this next thing. Americans are about 2 paychecks away from bankruptcy. If something happened to you and your paycheck stopped, after about 2 paychecks, the average American family would file bankruptcy. Now, we're going to eliminate that financial stress on your life today forever, or at least you can if you'll follow these principles. So let's get started. What are our topics we're going to talk about? The single greatest financial decision you will ever make in your life. One of the biggest decisions you'll ever make in your life. We'll talk about that. We're going to ask, why would I give? Why should I give to others? What are investment options and what do they mean? Is the stock market risky? Is it a risky place to put my money? What are the 2 biggest advantages you have of being young? We're going to talk about the magic of compound interest. You may have heard those words, compound interest. We'll talk about that. And then I'll answer some questions, normal questions that I get from college and high school students. I'll answer those. But first of all, let me say, who am I speaking to you? My name is Dale Alexander. The company, this is not the business that I'm in. I'm not a stockbroker or a financial advisor. The company that I work for does insurance benefits for school systems. But early on in college, I fell in love with learning about how money works. And so I started studying on that and became a stockbroker and went on to get my Certified Financial Planning designation, what's called the CFP. I got that designation. So while this is not my job, it is what I have studied for over 30 years. And I love teaching these principles. So let's get started with the biggest financial, maybe decision you will ever make in your life. Okay, ready? Here goes. All right. Most of you watching this lesson are maybe mid-20s and into high school. And you don't have your first real career job yet. Maybe you work at a golf course or a restaurant or something like that, part-time. But parents, most of the time, are kind of taking care of you. You don't have your first real big job yet. Is that fair to say? Okay. But at some point, you are going to get your first kind of big job when you get out of college, certainly, or out of high school, and you go start kind of a career. You're going to get that first job. Now, I think most of you would agree that most of our parents are probably taking care of you. They're paying your expenses, you're living in their home, so you really don't have a lot of expenses. So let's say for all practical purposes, you're making 0 right now, or close to it, as far as your first career job. At some point, you are going to get your real big career job. And you are going to go from making 0 to making 100% of some salary, okay, or some income. And that income is probably going to be much greater than where you are now, which is for the most part about 0. So let's say you're at 0 right now. And when you get that first job, instead of taking 100% of that new job income, I'm going to tell you, take 70% of that income. From the first check you get, take 70% of that income. And I want you to save 20% and give 10% away. And let me say this, I don't care where you give it. Just give 10% of that income away. You're going to see an example of what this means. But you're going from 0, where you are now, to some number of 100% of some number. You're at zero now. I'm going to state this again. Don't take the full 100%. Cut it back to 70%. And you're going to save 20% and give 10%. Now, what does the average American do? We not only take that full 100%, we kind of blow through that and actually live on about 105% because you think, I've got this new job. I'll start taking credit cards, start putting things on credit, and all of a sudden I'm spending more than I'm bringing in. That's kind of what an average person does. Not you. You're smarter than that. Here's the point. Because you're at zero now and you're going to some number, if you make that number 70, look at this point my friend David Helton says. He says, you don't have a standard of living established yet. And whatever you accept as your standard of living, that is your reality. That is your reality. You don't know that 100% is what you should be living on if you set it at 70. Let 70 become your 100%. And I'll show you in an example what this is going to mean for your life. Let 70 be your 100%. You don't have a standard of living established. Whatever you set, that's going to be normal for you. And here's the most important point of this. You are at an age, this is the most important point today. You are at an age that you can set this number because you're at zero now. You can set this number that you're going to accept as your standard of living. You can set it now. Listen to this. If you take 3 paychecks, I used to say 5, and a financial advisor friend of mine said, no, give them 3. If you take 3 paychecks, getting 100% of that check, you will never be able to back down to 70%. You will never have that chance again. You have a chance, but you will have that in your budget and be spending it, and you will never be able to back down to the number that you want to and you are going to set today as your standard of living. If you take 3 checks, it's over. You will never be able to back down. Now, there are some people who have passed this lesson on to maybe some 27, 28-year-olds, 30-year-olds, or there may be, I've had 55 and 60-year-old people doing this saying, I wish I had done that. If you're in a career and you didn't use 70 as your standard of living, it's all not over. Maybe you're in a career and you're spending 100%. Here's what I would tell you. Any new money that comes into your house, any new raise that you get, anything new, put 70% on that new money. Now you may be spending 100 of where you are now and you just, Dale, I can't back down to 70. Just like you said, it's in my budget, I can't back down. Anything new though, you can do this from there on, okay? Now, let's look at what this story will do for you. Here's an example. Look in your notes that you printed out. I'm going to show you a saving and giving story of your future life. And I'm going to use a sample salary of you of $36,000. I'm going to say that's where you're going to have your career starting at $36,000. And the reason I use that number is because we work with schools and I've taught to some schools. That's kind of an average teacher's salary in some of the school clients that we have. So I'm going to use a $36,000 salary that you start at. Many of young kids in college I'm talking to say, well, I want to make more than that. Well, we can put more in there, just means all the numbers are bigger. But I'm just going to use a $36,000 salary. I'm going to start you there. At age 23, getting out of college, making $36,000, I'm going to give you 4% raises on that $36,000 every year. So it's like you're getting a raise every year, starting at $36,000. That's $3,000 a month. Now, $3,000 monthly salary, you're only going to take 70% of $3,000, which is what? $2,100. That's going to be what you live on, $2,100. You're going to save 20% of that $3,000, which is $600 every month, $600 every month, or $7,200 every year, right here, okay? And you're going to save 10% or $3,600 in a year, $300 a month, right? Your salary is going to increase with a raise every year. That means the 70% is going to go up also. Your savings is going to go up also. And then the cumulative amount that you've saved, and then counting investments. I'm going to have your investments that you invest that in. We'll talk about that later. They are going to earn an 8% rate of return, less than the stock market historically. Okay? So this shows what your investment balance is, and this shows the total amount that you give every year as your salary increases. Now, here's something you'll notice as you get started on this plan. As you start out living on $2,100, remember the total, and by the way, forget taxes, any of this, anybody watching this, adults, forget taxes right now. Let's talk gross numbers. But you're making that $3,000 a month, but you're only going to take $2,100. Now, you're going to feel this for a few months, and your friends are going to be taking their full salary. You know them. I mean, they're going to be going out and doing things and going on trips and buying stuff and clothes, getting credit cards and running up credit card debt, but you know better, right? So you're going to stick on $2,100 in this example. And that's going to sting for 2 or 3 or 4 months as they're taking all of their money, but you know better. And they're going to kind of laugh at you for a few months, but all you know is that $2,100 has become your 100%, right? That's become your 100%. Is that ultimately 70%? And they're going to be laughing at you for a few months. You're hanging out with them, and then they're talking to you, and they start finding out how much money you're saving every month. And then they see you go to a restaurant, and you tip somebody, a waitress or waiter who's very kind with you. You tip them a lot of money. You start giving. And after 3 or 4 months, they start getting jealous of you, right? First few months, it's gonna sting a little bit, but after that, they start wanting a little bit about what you've got, okay? Watch how that happens. So this is an example of a life focused on living on 70, investing and saving 20, and giving 10. Now, here's the best part of this. Let's go down to your retirement age, and I've collapsed this down. I took out from year 41 through 65, so I could collapse this down on one page. But look at the end of your saving and giving story when you get ready to retire. If I said you got to the end and you had $435,000, you would say, that's incredible. But hold on, if you look at this story, that's how much in this story you would have given away at giving away 10% starting at $36,000. You would have given away $435,000 in this example, and you would have saved and accumulated $5.2 million. $5.2 million. Now somebody will say, well, $5.2 million in the future in age 67 isn't five. I understand that. You know, today that may be $2.5, $3 million. But very few people today have $2.5 million in a retirement account. But this just shows an example of a modest salary, getting some raises, and living on 70% of it. And remember, you have this moment in your life to make that decision. And if you take 3 months worth of checks, you will never have this chance to do it again, because you will have that money in your budget, you will be spending it, and you will not be able to back down. Many parents that are going to watch this will say, I wish I had done that early on in my life. And it's because you don't have a standard of living, and you have that chance to set whatever standard of living that you want. Now, when I said, why would I give? And if you saw you would have given $400,000 away, some of you go, well, I could have that and put that aside. Remember that quote I said that the more you make, the more you give? Well, hopefully you're going to look at that and say, wow, that inspires me to really want to do that. But some people say, well, why would I give money? Why should I give money? And let me tell you why. Because there are a lot of people today in the world around you. They're suffering with anger, with loneliness, anxiety, depression, even suicide. And part of that reason is that the world tells us, social media, the people that we hit likes on, many of the things that we see in the world today are telling us to serve ourselves, to get our own. And it's the greatest lie ever told, to serve ourselves. And the greatest way to eliminate hopelessness and despair in our lives, it's by serving. It's by becoming second to others. And when you have a purpose, when your life gets a purpose and you start to taste giving, life gets new perspective. It is impossible to feel hopeless when you are giving hope. It is impossible to feel hopeless when you are giving hope. And let me say this, if you just live with financial margin, if you will live on 70%, and start building in 20% saving and 10% giving, and you're living on much less than you make, everything in life gets better. Everything gets better. Your marriage gets better. Your children listen to you better. Your job gets better. If you have a boss, your boss gets nicer. Your trips are better. If you live inside financial margin, everything gets better. So why won't everyone do this? Why won't everyone live in 70 and save 20 and give 10? Here's some of the reasons why. Because number one, I call it the highlight reels. Have you ever noticed on social media, and most of the things that you look at, most all day, every day, at least my children, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, these things. Most everything that you see are people's highlight reels. It's the best of everything. And in fact, do you ever see anybody that's having a bad day, that has a terrible car, that went on a terrible vacation, that's wearing terrible clothes, has a terrible hair day? No. All that we ever see are people's highlight reels. And what that's doing to us internally is it's creating the battle to keep up, the fear of missing out. Here's an example. Have you ever seen a great trailer of a movie? It looks like a great movie. And you go see the movie and it's terrible. It's because the trailer made it look great. All you were seeing was the highlight reels. And we have to know what that's doing to us internally. And it's making people go, I don't want to live on 70, I want to live at 100 to keep up with that. And everybody's life is not that great. When that's all you see, you begin to think that you're missing out. And successful people financially have broken away from that need to keep up and do what they ought to do and trust the plan. Dave Ramsey, a financial guru in this country, has a great quote, and he said this, "If you will live like no one else, the day will come when you will live like no one else." The second reason, I call it stranger danger, or actually the future self syndrome, okay? This is actually a financial thing that we study, and here's how this works. Stranger danger says that why don't people save and invest? Why, when I was 23, would I have not done these things when I know I'm going to need money in the future? Stranger danger means that thinking of myself in 30 or 40 years down the road, that future me is as foreign to me and unknown to me as someone that I randomly pass on a sidewalk. I can't imagine myself 30 or 40 years down the road. And that's why I choose to live on 100% of my income now, when every adult around you would say, you need to do this now, and I wish I had done that then. Why would you never do that in the future when you know it? And the only reason is future self syndrome. We really don't care about ourselves 30 or 40 years down the road until we start getting closer to that point. Here's an example. Why would I ever smoke? Why would I ever smoke if I know that is going to cause a very bad death in my life? Why would I ever smoke? As long as that death is way out there, I really don't care about that today. That future self syndrome, and you have to break through that stranger danger. And successful people have just begun to look at their future out there and prepare for it today. And that's what you are going to do with 70, because 70 solves all of those problems. The next thing is called the danger zone. Now, let's go to this brilliant, beautiful chart with these incredible graphics and look at the danger zone. And here's what the danger zone means. When you start saving and investing early in your life right now, at say 22, when you get out of college or on after high school, and you start saving, well, you're going to go for some years here, and it doesn't look like the money is doing very much. You're saving for 1 or 2 years, and you get a statement that says, I've only got $2,000 in here, and I've been saving for a couple of years. This isn't doing anything. It's not doing anything. And so I'm going to take that money. It's just not working, and I'm going to take that money and I'm going to spend it. Or when you start working for a company, and they have what's called a 401k plan, we'll talk about that in a second, and you start automatically putting money in there, statistically, you're going to have several jobs in your life, quite a number of jobs in your life. But as you put money in an account at the company that you work for, and you ever leave and go to one of those new jobs that doesn't feel like a lot of money in that account, and statistically what people do is when they leave that company, they take that money and spend it. They say, well, it's only $1,000. I'm going to take it and I'm going to spend it, instead of rolling it to the new company plan or taking it and putting it in your own investments. You think it's not a big deal because it doesn't look like it's accumulating a lot. But you have to trust that this works, because as you begin to accumulate, it looks small, and then it starts growing on top of each other and growing on top of each other. It's called compounding of interest. The money that your money is earning, it's earning interest, and then that goes on top, and all of that is earning interest, and it gets bigger faster. But you have to break through these thin years where it just doesn't feel like a lot is happening. You have to trust that down here it's going to work. And if you look at that chart that I showed you, in fact, let me back up and show you this chart. If you looked at age 38, the account is earning, it's growing $35,000 just in that year, as much as you started out making in your job. It's growing that much. But if you'll break through that danger zone and leave that money in there, it begins to take off. And you can't imagine what happens to that down here. Wealthy people have just learned to leave it alone and let it begin to accumulate, and then it really takes off. And the last reason is people just have a lack of knowledge. You haven't been given a class like this and taught that this is how things work, okay? Now, that's one of the reasons why. Okay, so Dale, I'm saving money, I'm saving, I'm doing what you said. Where do I put my money? Well, let's look at where you can invest. What are investment options for you? So most investments, a quick finance course, most investments are some combinations of 4 things: cash, bonds, stocks, and real estate. Cash is things like a checking account or a savings account at a bank, right? Cash are things where you set money aside and you can get it pretty quickly, okay? There's not really a lot of penalties in that. It's liquid, okay? But you usually get almost no return on it, okay? So it's very kind of boring places to put your money. The second place that you can save and invest your money is what's called bonds. Now, not to get too deep into this, a bond is where you just loan money to a company, okay, for an interest rate that they pay you for loaning them that money, and after a certain number of years, they pay you your interest back. For example, if I wanted to buy a bond issued by Coca-Cola, I could get my stockbroker, say, give them $10,000 for a bond from Coca-Cola, say it's a 20-year bond. I give them that money, and they pay me interest on that loan to them. They go out and use that $10,000 that I loaned them, okay? And they pay me interest for that 20 years. And at the end of that 20 years, when that bond matures, then they pay me that $10,000 back. But all of those years, I've been getting an interest rate that's higher, say, than cash type accounts, okay? Bonds are better for people who want more security in the income that they draw, like retirees, for example. The third place to put money is called stocks. Now, where a bond was loaning an organization money, a stock is what? Owning a small percentage of a company. Coca-Cola, for example. I could call a stockbroker and say, hey, I have $50 or $100 that I want to invest every month, and I want to buy Coca-Cola stock, okay? So if I sent $50 and Coca-Cola were $50 a share, I would buy 1 share of Coca-Cola stock, right? A very tiny, tiny piece of ownership in Coca-Cola. And as that company I'm investing in does well, people want to own that stock, so the stock value rises in price, okay? That's called stocks, where you buy a very small piece and you own a small piece of a company. And the fourth type of investment option you have is real estate. Most everybody knows what real estate is, right? It's the home that you may live in, your family may live in, or maybe a commercial building that a company is housed in, okay? Real estate. And the great thing about real estate is that you can get what's called leverage out of that. Leverage means, for example, if you get out of college and you go buy your first home, and let's say the home is a $100,000 home, well, they want 10 or 20% down, $20,000 down on that $100,000 home. So you pay $20,000, and every month that you pay them that monthly payment, part of that monthly payment goes into what's called the equity of that home, okay? So every month you make them that payment, you're building ownership in that home. But the leverage part of real estate works like this. That home that you bought for $100,000, real estate usually may increase in value. So if that home is now a couple of years later worth $120,000, $20,000 more, and you sell it for $20,000 more, that's a gain of $20,000. But you only had to put $10,000 or $20,000 down. So if you put $20,000 down and made $20,000, that's a 100% rate of return. That's called getting leverage from an investment like real estate. The two places that most people get wealthy in this country is owning stocks and real estate. That's where most wealth is created. Now, when you start investing, you'll hear the financial planning pyramid. And what that means is you start investing in more conservative type investments like building an emergency fund before you start investing in stocks and real estate. It would be like, don't buy a Ferrari as your first car when you're starting out. Get something that's more reliable and less expensive if it broke. Okay. So where can we take small dollar amounts and save and invest, Dale, you may ask? A mutual fund is where, imagine a bucket of money that lots of people send money to. And there are professional managers that are studying the stocks or bonds of hundreds of different companies. So if you put money in this one mutual fund, you're actually spreading small dollar amounts among hundreds of different companies. Some of them may do well, and some of them may be in down times when they don't do as well. So you take smaller dollar amounts and spread it out over lots of different companies versus having to take a guess on which one you think is going to do well. Let professional managers invest your money and figure out where it ought to be. And it's taking small dollar amounts to get large coverage of different companies' stock zones, okay? That's probably where most of you will start your investing. Talk to your advisor about that. Is the stock market risky? This chart shows $1 invested since 1926, and it shows what that $1 would have turned into. This is actually up till 2006. And it shows the worst events in U.S. and even world history. The stock market crash in the late 1920s, Pearl Harbor, the Vietnam War, the stock market crash in 1987, the Gulf War, September 11th. At times, the world thought that the world was over. People literally were jumping out of buildings to their death back in the Great Depression. But if you look, most of these worst events in world history are barely a blip on the stock market's return over time. And this is since 2006. Let's take that and go to 2017. It even goes beyond that. If you look, these worst things, when people thought the world was over, they're barely blips on the stock market's returns long term. Think of investing in stocks as this. It's like walking up a staircase with a yo-yo. Imagine walking up a staircase, and this is the return of stocks, and this is the return of banks, and more conservative type investments. That $1 in small company stocks turned into $32,000 from 1926 until 2017. And in bigger type companies, that $1 turned into $7,000. But this is the general stock market. But if you look, it's like doing a yo-yo, which goes up and down, but in a staircase that is angled like that. So while there are temporary ups and downs, you have to look at the long-term returns of the stock market. So if you're investing long-term, which you all are starting to do, it's actually safer probably to be in the stock market than it is much more conservative type investments for long-term. Statistically, that's the case. So because of your age that you are, your advantages of youth is you have time that in these downturns, okay, the market has rebounded and come back. It also allows you to be more aggressive, where you can be in more smaller type companies than bigger type companies, okay? Because they usually outperform in the long term. Dollar cost averaging just means that if you keep, for example, that $25 saving and investment every month, you keep sending that in, and as these prices go down temporarily and you send the same dollar amount, if you're sending $100 a month into a mutual fund or your 401k and share prices are $50, like I said, if Coca-Cola were $50 a share, I would be buying 2 shares with $100. If it went down and went to $25 with that same 100, I'm buying 4 shares now. And you see long term what the markets do. They're up and down, but on that staircase historically, okay? Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is compound interest. And here's what that means. I want you to take 3 different employees. One is an employee that says, for the first 8 years of my life, I'm going to start saving $2,000 a year. Forget the number of 2,000. I'm just going to start saving some money every year. And I'm going to do that for 8 years, and then I'm going to stop. Nobody will ever do that, by the way. The second employee says, I'm going to go and play early on, and I'll pay later. But I'm going to play for those 8 years, and then I'm going to start saving and investing. To equal the same amount as the first person who saves for 8 years and then stops, this second employee that's starting 8 years later has to save for the rest of their years up to age 65 to equal what the first one started and then stopped. Because the investment amount is earning interest more than the $2,000 this person is actually having to pay. So they've got an amount in the account that is earning more. It's called compounding. And the more money you get in your account, the more it's building on top of each other. Because the bigger it gets, that is earning more money, which makes it bigger and bigger. Now, this third person would start here and invest for the rest of their time and double what these first two. By the way, this one's called the boss, this one's called young and smart, this one's young and dumb, and this one's called their future boss. But compounding of interest just means that any investment that you have, if you leave it in there, the interest that it earns stays in the account, and the whole thing, what you put in plus the interest, is now earning interest also. So it's growing on top of each other. That's called compounding of interest, okay? It's not a product that you get, it's just what happens when you leave the money in there and it begins to build on top of each other. So in closing, what are some questions that I hear from kids who ask me, Dale, when should I start investing? When should I start saving? If you have a parent that could maybe help you out, my sons worked for my company during their senior year of high school, and they made $100 a week, and they would take that and start investing it. Or if you go cut grass or do these things, or the first income you start earning in that job, start you a mutual fund that invests in stocks and start putting money in there, okay? As soon as you can, start investing. How do I start out saving and investing? Go to an advisor and get you a mutual fund. I would say one that invests in stocks, okay? They'll help you figure that out for you, and they'll explain how the markets work long term. And when you get out on your own, make sure that you build an emergency fund of at least $1,000 so that if an emergency happened, you don't have to put things on a credit card. Try and stay away from credit cards as much as you can. And start in a mutual fund, not in an individual stock. Because remember, with a mutual fund, small dollar amounts in hundreds of different companies. If I start working at a company, what do? Many times they may have what's called a 401k, which is a retirement plan where you take money out of your paycheck. It comes out before taxes and goes in investments, much like mutual funds, okay? So and many times those companies that you start out will match what you put in. So if I put in $50, they may match that $50, which would like be getting a 100% rate of return. Next, what book should I study about money? What should I be reading and studying about money? First is A Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey that I mentioned earlier. The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. The Millionaire Next Door I mentioned earlier. And The Wealthy Barber by David Chilton. So in closing, don't drift. Have you ever gone to the ocean? I love going to the ocean, by the way. Have you ever gone to the ocean and you go out in the ocean and you're playing and there's waves and you're on a surfboard or a raft and you're having fun? In 30 or 45 minutes when you're ready to come in, you notice that you're 300 yards down the beach. It's because of the drift. And everybody's having fun and playing around and don't realize that there's a drift going on. My pastor says, nobody realizes when we're getting lost, but everybody realizes when you are lost. And in your financial life, and as you head out and start this journey, don't drift. Stay aware of what you're doing. And that's why these principles that I'm teaching today, and 70 solves the drift. If you can start with 70, it takes care of the drift for the rest of your life. John Maxwell says, you will always pay a price. You can play now and pay later, or pay now and play later. But when you pay later, the price is always greater. Make a choice to pay now, and you can play later. As Dave Ramsey said again, if you will live like no one else today, the day will come when you can live like no one else then. And remember this, discipline weighs ounces and regret weighs tons. Some of you watching this program today, somebody watching this lesson, when you're in your mid-50s and you have grandchildren all around you, somebody, and actually you'll remember watching this on video, and here's what you'll say to those grandkids when they say, Grandma, Grandpa, how did you get all this? Somebody watching me today is going to say this. I just remember I was watching this guy on a video, and he said if I would start living on 70% of my income, one day I would be sitting here talking to my grandkids and I would be able to say, grandkids, that is how we've been able to do all of this. Somebody will say that. Make a choice today to be different, maybe even weird. That means not broke, not stressed, or not tired. And just know this, you are loved, you are special, and go be great. I love you. God bless.